Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining. I think we'll get started because I've probably got to end this at quarters to 12. So a very quick introduction. My name is Abbas. I'm based out of the London office for Hortonworks. I'm a strategy consultant by training, and I run value management for Hortonworks. Just a show of hands, who's from Hortonworks here? So there's a few, which is great. So you guys will take the lead on asking the questions. It's always helpful. So what am I going to cover today? So I'm not sure how many of you have read the abstract. The abstract talks about the cloud transformation story. But there are a few things which I would like to cover. I've got 40 minutes. I'll try and leave 5 minutes in the end for questions. So I'll walk through some of the key things that we see in the market in terms of why people and organizations are moving towards the cloud. What are some of the important factors? Some of the challenges that we see Fortune 500 organizations are having while moving to the cloud. And I'll give you certain examples. Please do not quote names outside, or please do not tweet customer names as I talk. I'll walk through certain kind of strategies, which includes the hybrid cloud strategy, which you've heard multiple times over here at Summit, and you will over the next 2 days. And then the next part, I'll spend some time about the whole TCO, or the cloud economics, as we say, because it seems like that's a key topic which a lot of organizations want to understand about. And I'll give examples of what does it look like when you're a leader or a laggard, and I'll explain the differences, and I'll leave you with 3 key takeaways which you might be wanting to take through as part of your cloud transformation story. So if you look at the key reasons why organizations go ahead and do the cloud, so there are multiple things, but the number one reason is agility, not really cost. So every organization I speak to across industries, financial services, telco, etc., they all say that they want to do self-service, and they don't really want the IT to be able to go on with their 6-month cycles of procurement, procuring a hardware or a server, and then take another 2 to 3 weeks of onboarding, and then you start climbing Mount Everest to deliver the use cases and get it to production stage. So there's a big belief that when you click a button on the cloud and you will get to production readiness, which isn't really true, but agility seems to be the key factor. Amongst the other points over here, cloud economics. So, and I'll talk about it detail later today. What a lot of people fail to understand is that the cloud economics varies by the use case. So running a use case like a single view of whatever, be it for capital markets, a customer, depending on what the industry might be, is very different than running something like a cyber or anti-money laundering. So the cloud economics has to be done not only from a TCO perspective as infrastructure, software, and the overall FT elements around that, but you have to optimize that per the use case. The third thing is about the ecosystem. So obviously not every cloud vendor has this similar set of ecosystem as far as abilities to do machine learning or data science is concerned. And a lot of organizations fail to consider that the ecosystem plays a large part, because going forward, you have to be able to deal with those vendors as part of the larger ecosystem to be able to deliver use cases efficiently. So that is one of the key considerations that they want to have. Legacy remediation is a very easy one. Everyone knows about it. I'm not going to talk about it in detail. Number 7 is the skills part, which I've intentionally put in the end, because people seem to forget that. So we believe, or at least I believe, that if you cannot do DevOps and automation on-premise, there is no reason for you to go to cloud, because that is one of the fundamental things that you should be looking to when you're deciding whether or not you should be going to the cloud, what kind of cloud operating model you should be going after, and what does it mean once you've gone there. So the skills part is a key element around that. And then the number 6 part is what you've heard Scott and everyone else talk about, is cloud itself is an infrastructure strategy. So you need to have a data strategy, which becomes your cloud strategy, which becomes your business strategy. And I think I made a very good point yesterday as well, and also wrote a blog about that. And I fundamentally agree that a lot of organizations are starting to see value in that approach, whereby they are taking the data strategy equally important as their cloud strategy. So I wanted to give you certain examples. So what are some of the challenges that we're seeing? So if you look at the 7 commandments that I had on the previous slide, I just picked out 3 or 4 of them which organizations actually are talking about and trying to attack from different points of views. But obviously, everyone's at a different maturity level. Obviously, everyone's at a different stage. So the first example, obviously, is if you see DevOps and automation, which I talked about, the skill sets. So there is a large telco in Poland who I work with. They can do an upgrade in 200 nodes in days or weeks. However, much larger organizations who are much further down their journey, they've gone to town saying that they are a cloud native, cloud first approach, et cetera, but they're still struggling with monthly upgrades, patches, and all kind of things. So the point here, which I'm trying to make, is that, again, DevOps and automation depends upon the use case, depends upon which customer you're talking about, and it's not necessarily the fact that it's a particular skill versus the other. You have to customize in terms of the nature of it. The second, cloud portability. So I work with a very large bank, and again, they have a cloud-first approach. And whilst they were going on to deployment as far as cloud adoption was concerned, one of the key things that they realized that the cost to rewrite an app per line of business was $1.5 to $2 million. Plus, there's an 18-month time lag which you get to do before you get that to production. So the whole cloud portability thing is very interesting because a lot of people forget that in addition to the agility and the TCO economics behind it, there's a time element to that. There's a cost of delay, there's a cost of risk, which you forget while doing the mathematics around that. The third one is the cost model and the value. So as I mentioned earlier, you should be choosing what kind of cloud operating model you have, depending upon your circumstances. So a lot of research has been done around this. The bottom rule, so the general rule is, if you pick one cloud vendor and you're running an annual run rate of $30 million, at that point, you should start looking at another vendor. Now, when I say this, this is not for SMB enterprises, obviously. This is for large Fortune 500 organizations. But that is when you start to see the benefits cross over in terms of the whole TCO economics fall through. And I'll talk about it later when you'll see, and I'll split that down by use cases and type of workloads, and you'll see what I mean by that. But effectively, when you're using private clouds or public cloud, more so in Europe than in the US. So if you look at Europe, they're not only beyond the big names that we all talk about, most of the countries have one or two dominant players who are setting up private clouds. Like in France, you've got OVH, you've got Exascale in Switzerland, etc. And they're combining forces with telcos, because obviously telcos have the unique ability to put a name to a transaction, and they see as a great opportunity to monetize that and launch a big data as a service offering. And in that perspective, it's very important to understand that the cost economics of a private cloud is very different from a public cloud. But if your primary concern is regulation, again, linking it back to the use cases, because we have GDPR implemented since May 25th, a lot of people believe that they would rather focus on security and governance as opposed to something which is purely based on cost and agility. And the last one is procurement. So I talked about that it takes most procurement organizations 6 months to procure a server. I'm just saying that metaphorically, obviously, but it's not too far from the reality. And it takes them 2 to 3 weeks to onboard after that. So the model which we've seen, which works pretty well, is if you have a central team whereby you're pooling your resources and the funding is done across the various functions in a pretty much a center of excellence-esque model. So what that allows you to do is that you've got the buy-in from the execs very early. You've got the resources dedicated for a specific project, for a specific use cases pretty early, and the overall procurement cycle reduces. Specifically, if, say, for example, I'm a bank, and I have merchant banking, retail banking, capital markets, etc., and each one of them now want to go and do their own thing on the cloud. Obviously, they all want to be self-sufficient, and they all want to bypass the IT. So what is the role of an IT in that case? Because most of us generally deal with IT and people who work in the IT in multiple scenarios. So one of the things that we are seeing is that IT organizations are starting to become a provider of the providers. Because obviously, once you have multiple cloud providers, there's data sprawl, there's governance issues, etc. And there's got to be one central governing body, a custodian, who are able to deliver that service in a secure and governed manner to the lines of businesses. And in that case, it really helps if you have a procurement model which is centralized COE fashion. So a very good example is Santander in Spain. They do have a very similar model like that. and also the UK government. Across the public sector, if you think of it, they have the Treasury, they have the borders, they have multiple different teams. But as far as the cloud funding is concerned, it's linked across, and they have a very COE-esque procurement cycle model. So we've talked about the commandments, we've talked about certain examples, what customers are doing and what they're struggling with. But if I have to summarize that if you have HDP or any other data platform today, you've got 3 or 4 options. So what would that be if you're going onto a cloud? So this is how I summarized that, and I said so you've got certain applications, and say they're running HTTP and they're on-premise. So do you want to do that? Probably not, because A, it's not strategic. B, your costs will be very high as in terms of storage is concerned and all of that. And C, that's not the direction where your CEO or the C-level are asking you to go into, for multiple reasons as we've discussed. The second option is infrastructure as a service. So you take all the apps that you have today, which you've spent the last 5, 6 years. So if you remember, back into 2013 or 2014, I don't remember when the chasm curve crossed, but a lot of the big data or analytic projects were hit with a hammer called as Hadoop. And it's the same thing now. And now people are hitting it with a hammer called as cloud. So people are kind of forgetting the lessons that they had and that they've had to go through. So it's a very important thing. So you can't really take everything and put it on IaaS, because not all apps are cloud ready yet, or you don't necessarily want to do that for multiple reasons in that. And the third option is when organizations make a lot of hula-boo about that we're going cloud native, etc., and we'll get everything off on-premise. And the questions which I generally ask our customers is that, has any one of you ever taken off Exadata? Or has any one of you taken off EDW? Or any one of you taken off SQL? The answer is no, because that's how the IT cycle has been for the last 20, 30 years. So it's, I wouldn't say imbecile, but it's not pragmatic to say that you will go all of your apps on cloud when not all of the vendors have the offerings which are mature to be able to do that in a fashion that you would like to do. So there is an alternative, which we as Hortonworks have done with a lot of our organizations, which I'll show in the next slide. But before that, I just want to understand a show of hands. How many of you are working in organizations where you have production-ready analytical workloads in the cloud? 1. So that rests my case. So that's exactly what I wanted to say, that it's very good to say cloud's great, it's very good to say we want to do Kubernetes or whatever, but doing an MVP for 10 days or a few weeks is a totally different matter as compared to doing a production-ready use case. So therefore, if you look at the numbers as service came out, so the median cloud adoption across Fortune 500 companies is 19%, which means 19% of the organizations have more than 10% of their entire workloads on cloud in certain fashion in production. That's it. And if you break down by industries, of that 19%, 60% of them are financial services. So the market is huge. There are multiple reports. Gartner says that the market will become $411 billion in 2020, which is true. But then again, from a reality perspective of how people are using that, it's very different. And just so that I understand from an industry perspective, how many of you are from FS, financial services? Telcos? None. Interesting. Manufacturing? Retail? Utilities? Or energy? So that's the general mix that we see in any conference or any customer meetings as well. Obviously, I'm surprised there are no one from telco, but generally we see a big concentration in financial services and telcos, because those are the people who have had serious ways of collecting the data in a secure fashion, and they've been doing analytics for a long time. So if you understand this, that if you are doing a single cloud deployment strategy, and remember the term which I said, the rule of thumb is $30 million before you move on to another vendor, how do you avoid all of that and go and do a hybrid approach? So we work with a very large bank who went to town and said that they wanted to do cloud native only. And they tried that, but they haven't been successful over the last 18 months. So we went back in again at the start of this year and we said, how do we help you go into a hybrid cloud approach? So obviously from a Hortonworks standpoint, this is purely Hortonworks. A lot of the names you see over there are Hortonworks specific, is we used HDF for data ingestion, and then we applied the data fabric, the data plane layer, for the purposes of governance, metadata governance, and security. But we also built something which you see in the gray, which is the workload deployment matrix. So what a workload deployment matrix is based on specific use cases, whether it's a lighthouse workloads, whether you're running persistent or ephemeral workloads, whether your deployment cycles are shorter than the normal, our field teams, our engineering teams have identified certain specific criteria and developed this matrix which allows you to optimize your workload performance. And what that does is that A, you're able to get through the data in a governed and secured fashion, and B, you're able to optimize your workloads, which allows you for the purposes of TCO benefits going forward. So how do you actually read this slide? The way to read it is that, as I said, because no one's ever taken off certain workloads or will not take away certain workloads from on-premise, you will still have a percentage. It could be 20%, it could be 25%, or whatever, on-premise, depending upon the circumstances, because you got highly sensitive data, you cannot afford to go onto the cloud migration yet, based on your current situation and based on what the cloud offerings are, how mature they are, and therefore you keep them on-premise, because even though the cost is high, your risk is very low. And if you're a bank or a telco or an insurer, your risk is a big thing for you. The second is, you take certain apps, we generally see between 25 to 30%, which are medium risk. Those are the only apps which you put on IaaS because of the fact that A, they're cloud ready, and B, the offerings which are being provided by the various vendors, they're at a point whereby you can go and deploy it to production capabilities. And the third one is, so we're not saying that you shouldn't go to the cloud. If you read this slide, we're saying that, yes, we will help you accelerate your cloud adoption. If anything, if you do the math based on the numbers I said, we're saying that 75% of your workloads should be on cloud across IaaS or PaaS or cloud native, whatever the case might be. But we're saying you should go to cloud native only if you have net new business applications whereby you're unsure of what the nature of the workloads will be. And only you should go and try out and build it through. Other than that, you should split through. And this is what we call as a hybrid architecture. Obviously, I'm not going to the technical details beneath this. But this allows you the economics. This allows you to manage risk across all of them. This allows you to improve your service because now you don't have to wait for, say, 24 months. Because if you start putting everything on cloud native and rewriting the app, obviously it's not going to be seamless, and you've got to have time for that. And the third part is that combining all of this, the benefit that you get is time to market in terms of products and service offerings. So the whole hybrid approach thing is beneficial across all value drivers. So the obvious next question is that, do you have metrics around that? So that's the next part of the presentation. So I'll put all the metrics at the start, and I'll walk through each one of them. If you look at cost reduction, so cost reduction, as I said, depends upon use case, depends upon what the numbers are. So when I say 19 to 37% cost reduction, that's based on the fact that over 50% of your workloads in the cloud will be ephemeral. So I did the model, and we worked with multiple customers, and they validated it. So generally, if you're going to cloud, and less than 33% or 32% of your workloads are ephemeral, you're not going to get the cost benefit. So cost reduction obviously has multiple streams. There's infrastructure savings, there's storage savings, there's the whole optimization of your workloads, as I said, because of deployment matrix, etc. But if you combine all of them, you have to make sure that what percentage of your workloads are ephemeral, what percentage are lighthouse, and therefore the easiest way to do it is if you take one use case at a time, build it today versus tomorrow, and then extrapolate it, not across the entire company, but only for that specific type of use cases across the various lines of businesses. Second, the service improvement thing. So it's a very conservative estimate, but the basis for that is FTE rationalization. So the number of FTEs you can rationalize because of the ability to improve your service, and you just extrapolate that over the project lifecycle. We've assumed for a large use case, production readiness, it'll take you anything between 12 and 18 months. So based on that, you can save $2 million just for one line of business. Cost avoidance. So as I said, the cost to rewrite an app is $2 million. Most large organizations have anything between 6 and 10 lines of businesses. Each lines of business have anything between 6 and 12 apps that they want to rewrite in some form or shape another. So because you're going for the hybrid approach, and now you're not just blindly putting everything into cloud native, and you're splitting it across, you can avoid the cost, at least in year 1 to year 3. So the obvious question is, which year do I see the cloud adoption go through, whereby I can start rewriting the apps which I haven't done? So in our experience, it says that if you're going through a cloud journey, it takes between 3 and 4 years to get to a point whereby you have 50% of your workloads on the cloud, production ready, in a manner which is delivering, you're getting the results in a seamless fashion. Obviously, it'll depend upon which organization's case-to-case basis, but those are general benchmarks I'm talking about across industries. The last one is interesting because, as I said, banks, insurers, telcos, they're all publicly listed companies, and they care about risk. So imagine if you have a cyber use case, or if you have, for a bank, the ability to look at criminal transactions, and you have to port it to the cloud. It's a huge risk for that. So the way we are saying is that you cannot take away the risk as far as the commercial nature of the risk is concerned. So multiple risks are there, liquidity, insurance, etc. But you can improve the operational risk because of the whole hybrid approach. So the number, when you do the math, and I wish I had more time to show you the model, but it's anything between 20 and 25% that you can reduce, which will allow you to deliver the cost of risk, which goes down. So cost of risk is a key factor because a lot of people put that on their annual statements. It has a direct bearing on your working capital. It has a direct bearing on how much money can you raise from the market, how much leverage do you have. So it's a key important factor because it goes all the way up to the board in that respect and can allow you an extra lever to take that forward. So those are generic numbers. So what I want to do next is, as I said, the leaders and laggards. I want to show the exact same metrics. How does it look like depends upon who you are. So what is the definition of a leader? So for the purposes of this study, the definition of a leader is some organizations who have more than 35 to 40% of their workloads in production for at least 12 months. The definition of a laggard is organizations who have less than 5 to 10% of their workloads onto the cloud. Doesn't even matter if it's in production or not, because we are assuming that you've just started the journey, or you're doing a few POCs, or you've done MVPs going forward. So if you look at the numbers over here, so remember the average cost savings that I had said in the previous slide, 19 to 37%. If you're a leader and if you've gone through production, if you've done that for the last 4 to 5 years, your cost savings are way more than 50%. Classic example is Netflix. So if you look at the Netflix story, the way they have done, and I'm not going to give any prizes to the vendor over there because it's their own IT systems over there, but 99.8% is what they claim of their entire streaming workloads and all of that is on cloud, and they're getting significant cost benefits around that. You've got Capital One, GE Oil, you've got Myers. All of these companies have gone through that journey, and the average what they see is anything between 40 and 50%. Laggards, a classic example is a lot of continental European organizations. A lot of it because they're going through the private cloud journey, and they're not necessarily employing the hybrid approach. But again, the rule is it's only when you've been able to successfully deploy multiple use cases in production, that's when you start to see the benefits come through. And therefore, I keep going back to the thing that if you can't do DevOps and automation on-premise, you shouldn't go to and do that on cloud. The second is the whole FTE rationalization and service improvement, which I talked about. So how many number of IT incidents can you reduce? So this is one area where you will see immediate benefits. Unless you only put reporting use cases in the cloud, you will see immediate benefits on that. So therefore, the numbers are really high. 70% is a very, very high number, which I think was quoted by one of the logistics companies. And the immediate benefit which they had was it was linked to their entire supply chain and flow simulation benefits that they had. The third one, IT overhead cost. It's particularly important because a lot of people believe, as I said, that if you can go to the cloud, you don't necessarily have to go through the entire IT organization that you have. And you can go and build your self-service businesses. And in that process, people just take out their credit card and open the floodgates. And as a result, there are not only the cost of the compute, but there are additional costs which you have to consider in terms of overhead costs, which a lot of people fail to design from an information design basis. And the last one, operational risk, which I talked about. A key important factor for operational risk is, if you look at the multiple parameters for operational risk, as far as cloud is concerned, a lot of people forget that from a skills perspective, it's not the same skills. So people believe that we've got certain network administrators and we can get them to do the same thing. But it's not. There's a huge amount of upgradation that you need to do as far as skills, which obviously is a risk, which obviously is a cost, which goes in to the overall operational matters that you have. And if you're running a P&L, definitely it's a big matter. And it's not only a compliance issue. It affects your entire ability to deliver at a pace and at an efficiency ratio that you would like to do. So to sum up, and I saw a gentleman come up and give me a warning on the time. What do you do exactly as the 3 takeaways, as I said? So I've split that down into technical and business. I'm not a technical guy, as I said. I'm a strategy consultant by training, so I'm not going into the exact technicalities. I've got a lot of colleagues who can talk to you about that. But summing up at the 3 levels as I talked about, obviously, DevOps and security. You should be able to DevOps and automation. I can't repeat more times on premise, otherwise you shouldn't be able to do that. Data mobility and portability. I think we as an organization, we talk about being a global data management company, and it's very important that when you're porting your data sets, when you're porting your use cases and workloads, you're able to do it in a secure fashion. And the third one is data security and movement. So obviously, thanks to Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, that data security and governance is a mainstream subject. Otherwise, people always thought that it's a good-to-have thing. So it's very much in your view. I think it was released in the Analyst Day yesterday as well. And you should have a strong data security structure before you go onto the cloud. And from a business standpoint, the first one is, as I said, when you're doing the TCO economics, you should be doing at a use case level. So just to give you guys anecdotes, if you do the TCO economics for single view of a customer on a retailer, vis-a-vis the TCO for fraud for a large retail bank, the economics vary by over 57%. And it's not because of the fact that your basic infrastructure is changing, but it's primarily because the way you're designing your architecture and the way you're running your workloads is fundamentally different. Second is cloud operating model. As I said, you have to decide your operating model at the start, and you have to link your procurement cycles, you have to link your skills gaps accordingly based on the cloud operating model that you have. Whether it's private, whether it's hybrid, whether it's public, whether it's a combination of all of that, or whether you want to be going into a new market, doing that on your own. So as I said, a lot of telcos are trying to do that, so they're partnering with cheaper options as far as infrastructure is concerned, and offer as a service, and they want to create their own thing. So even whether it's internal use cases or external as a service, you have to decide that early and budget it in that respect. And the third thing, skills and resources. So I talked about skills, right, in terms of upgradation of skills. But what I haven't talked about particularly is the whole resources bit. So what we have seen is a lot of organizations, they have experts for a certain number of man days while they are planning their entire app writing journey. I don't have specific metrics to say what the impact has been, but there are at least 6 customers who have told me personally that it has helped them accelerate their cloud adoption journey. So it's beneficial to be able to do that, and you should definitely consider it in that respect. So those are the key pointers I wanted to leave you with, and I don't know, do I have 5 minutes? So any questions, I'm happy to take. Sure.
So on your hybrid strategy, shared services, multi-workload.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned native cloud.
Sorry?
No, sure. So you mentioned native cloud. I'm assuming you're referring to the cloud vendor provided services, right?
Yeah. So his question is, for those of you who couldn't hear, that is native cloud. Do I mean by cloud vendors? Yes, it's the cloud vendors, not if you want to start as a service on your own. The existing native cloud services that you have, the vendors. Yeah. The gentleman in the back.
You mentioned
And automation. Yeah. Yeah. Any more questions? I'll come to you in a minute.
Previous slide, you had not all apps are ready,
Yeah.
cloud ready,
Yeah.
and cloud is not mature. Can you give us a couple of examples on why you said that?
So I didn't say cloud is not mature. So I'm saying cloud offerings are still maturing. So there's a slight difference, but yeah, because I don't want to be taken out of context. So the example is obviously if you look at security and governance. So I can quote an example of a bank that I work with. As I said, they wanted to go on, and I'm obviously if you're expecting a name, I'm not going to give you that. But they went on the journey. They're working with us. They're a long-time customer of ours, and they've had security incidents, very basic ones, and therefore they've put that on the back burner. So what they're trying to do is that they're using CloudBreak, they're using data plane, and they're saying, can we do the whole IX thing for a specific set of use cases first, prove that if we can do that, and then for the low-risk applications, we'll try the native cloud because they believe the offerings are not mature yet. As far as not all apps are cloud ready, yes, not all apps are cloud ready because if it's a reporting app, it's very easy. You need aggregation, you can put it to the cloud. But if you're on a telco and you're doing NBNI analytics and you're doing churn analytics, you're pulling in data from multiple different sources. If you don't have the systems or processor or architecture in place to be able to do that on-premise today, there is no reason why you will be able to do that in the cloud just because it's a different provisioning. So, it depends upon the use case that you have and the application that you're moving towards. If that answers your question.
But if they are not ready on-prem, it's not necessarily cloud is not ready, right?
No, I didn't say that they're not ready on premise. So there are two different things. One is, so the way you define when you should move to the cloud, you have to go to the first slide which I had, the 7 commandments. Obviously, that's a generic framework which I just built. All organizations would have different ways of looking into it. That doesn't necessarily mean, so nowhere on that first slide in the 7 commandments, you will see on-premise. So if I go back over here, there's nowhere on-premise. So I'm not saying that your decision-making should be based on whether you're on-premise today or not. It's totally independent of that. But obviously, you have to make that decision purely based on the merits of the use case is what I'm saying, and not based on a generic manner that I as an organization want to go ahead with it, is what I'm trying to say. Yes, sir?
So in one of your slides, you implied I'll call it a net reduction in risk in moving to the cloud.
Yeah.
By some small percentage. And I think what you were looking at was maybe security risk versus operational risk.
This is purely operational risk, if this is the one you're talking about.
There was another one where you had I think it was like 1.5%, 1.7%.
This is the one?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I would assume you're, again, maybe the security risk is, I'm concerned about the risk of security, with being an insurance company, PHI, SPI, key management, things like that. So you have a breakdown of is there, I'll call it an increase in security risk with a reduction of operational risk, and then that's out to the, maybe 1.5% risk reduction?
Yeah, so for the purposes of this specific metric, the model only takes care of operational risk. So we did look into the 6 different types of risk, including liquidity, insurance risk, operational security risk, all of that, external, internal, whatever the case might be. But if you look, to be able to say that we will have a direct bearing on your liquidity risk just because you're moving to the cloud in a certain specific fashion, and you're able to it's like marketing effectiveness, right? It's very difficult to attribute that a particular customer is coming back to the store because of a particular campaign and not being affected by the others. You have to put the control group against that, and then you have to eliminate that. So for these purposes, this is purely operational risk, but we have looked into the other things, and the reason why we haven't attributed is because it's not exclusive. It's multiple factors. So it'll be wrong to say, because of doing this, you can get an outcome over there. So that's the reason why. I did not say at any place that moving to the cloud is more secure, just so that you know. I only said that will help you. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for being over here, guys. Sorry, I'm running out of time. I'll take your questions outside. The gentleman over there has shown me the flag 3 times. Thank you. Cheers.